Okay, uh, part of, really, for seriously, it's great to have everybody have a good time. That's a big part of what we do is fellowship and eating well and enjoying each other and get to know other people from other places, so it's great. I would like to speak just a minute. These are like ads, okay? These are infomercials, okay? But I'd like to say, and Marilyn, your timing was perfect. Is Marilyn here? Yeah. And also Ms. Chestnut, Norma, she said, Jane, I want to tell you something. She said, I think one thing that really is effective in your museum is the use of art. And I'm like, I'm just about to talk about that. That what we have is information, and we share all this information, and we share history, but then there is an emotional response to that. There is a want to illustrate it. There is a want to share your vision with somebody, and that's where this natural human expression of art is a response to this history and to these stories. And the first person that really helped us a lot was Jerry Thomas, okay? And Jerry Thomas, in all his work in building this gallery with the Florence Weiser Gallery, and of course the marvelous, marvelous statue of Comstock that's out in front of our museum that is now the symbol of the Guardians, standing guard and protecting our organization. So Jerry's vision was important. And then we've had artists that we've had featured art over the last few years, including Barb Bland and Charlie Norton. And then this year's featured artist is Peggy Fisher. She was here earlier, and she was taking pictures here in the middle, and she did the official artwork, which is the telegrapher, the telegraph operator, that you'll see featured there under the Guardians banner. And then also there's her print that is one of the auction items. And did you recognize who the telegraph operator is? You did right off the bat? It's hard, a little hard, because you don't see him without a hat, but that's J.D. Perry. Okay, that's one of our board members and guardians that's going to be here tonight, and he's posed right there in our depot with the original telegraph thing that's right there in the depot. So I don't know, that was our little homegrown piece of art, and Peggy is a marvelous photographer. And then that leads into, we have an artist with us today, and that's Mr. Stan Shook. Stan, right there. The man that doesn't have anything to say is right there. He's a silent guy. So, but Stan, yeah, this is over lunch. Did you see our new edition that just went up? Did you see that marvelous image of Thomas White as Roman nose? Okay, they're now above the Roman nose statue. And that is the work of Stan Shook. Stan also did the big buffalo soldiers with the blue eyes, and did the Forsyth Scouts image that attracted so much attention, the ones on horseback with the Indians in front that's over there. That's Stan's work. We have some of his artwork here in the magazine. And then Stan has just now brought us one more work. And I will tell you that Stan offered this, said, just enjoy it for a while, just enjoy it. And we enjoyed it so much, we quickly realized we could not live without it. Okay, so we applied for a Dane Hansen grant, and that has made possible these new lighting, to see the new lighting on the flag, the new lighting on Roman nose, the new lighting on the stagecoach, and also to purchase these artworks by Stan. And as you can see, his works has such an impact in large scale. That is one of the things that really grips you. So I'd like to publicly recognize Stan. Thank you for trusting us with his artwork and now installing more and then bringing this new work also to enjoy for a while. Stan, I'd just like to thank you. So. Yes.
To share that is partly why I do what I do, because I enjoy it, and if you like it, I'm happy for you, and I'm glad you like it. And you may not like it for the same reason I do, but you still liked it. So I won't ruin it by telling you what I thought when I saw it. But thanks for letting me put it in here.
Well, are you kidding? I mean, this is a beautiful addition to the museum.
So which other artists are you? Okay, there's, before we get to, you've got them. I think that right after Jerry Thomas, the next artist that we need to recognize is Valerie Smith. And we're sitting right here in her artwork. This whole edition is her vision, her artwork. Just absolutely amazing what Valerie envisioned, because we don't have the fort. We, you know, some of the original buildings that were in Wallace. Valerie envisioned how we could make it happen right here, and it's just incredible. And then this is her painting. When, you know, the museum obtained the cast of the fossil and, you know, needed to put it in context of when this was an ocean, and that's what Valerie did. And then my dear friend Melissa Rao in Topeka has created our lifelike sculptures. And what an incredible addition that has been to the museum with Roman Nose and Dr. Turner. And now we have Reuben Waller. And actually, Bill Hickok is on loan, but he's just kind of become, you know, part of who we are too.
He's here to scare the employees.
He's here to scare the employees. And the next one I would love to see. So this, you know, at some point we're going to start raising money for that. We need a laundress. They were such a big part of life on the post, and we need to talk more about that women's role. So to do a laundress and have her over here, I think that's the next figure we need inside the museum. But they mean so much. When you bring the school kids in, these lifelike figures, I can't tell you, like the school kids come in and they see Roman Nose and they're just like, and just stop. And, you know, and to see what Roman Nose meant to the Cheyenne when we unveiled him was just wonderful. And to see Reuben Waller's family so thrilled over having Reuben Waller here, you know, several of his descendants have visited, and Reuben Waller was in a lot of places, but we're claiming his story. You know, we're claiming him, and that's how the descendants see us now, as the place where Reuben's story is told. So, oh my God, the art's everything.
Yep. Completely agree, and I think that role's going to keep growing. So thank you for that comment. Okay, let's go ahead and let's introduce Mr. Steve.
So, as I said before, I used to do a lot of work with Fort Leavenworth. I'd either volunteer or contract services in media training, and I did staff rides, which was a lot of fun. And at that time, at least part of that time, General Petraeus was commanding Fort Leavenworth, and he really emphasized the media engagement. And so I had a talk radio show in Topeka, and I would be the media requirement for a lot of these majors. This is back when they had that, like, no major left behind movement, you know. And I would have them on my talk show talking about whatever their specialty was. I know Mona Jabril talked about the breast cancer awareness initiative in Kosovo. I mean, all these things that you wouldn't expect, you know, it's just not in your realm of possibility is what they would talk about, and it was a great experience for them. So while I was doing that, I got to meet a lot of public affairs officers, and I've known a lot over the course of my life, and helped train a few of them. And I have to tell you, watching Steve Boylan work as a public affairs officer, your idea of a public affairs officer, like the PR guy that's all warm and fuzzy and all that, that was not Colonel Boylan. He was the scariest public affairs officer I ever saw. He was terrifying. And he would be up there and he would kind of, not exactly growl, but it was kind of growling. And he was scary. And all these other people, I would watch them and I'd watch how he'd answer questions. And I'm telling you, everybody I've ever seen in that position at any level were like right here. And Boylan was like up there. He was so far above everybody else, it was ridiculous. So I have wanted to get him here forever, and finally we had the excuse with the communication on the trail, And I'm just so thrilled that he and Michelle, and I got to tell you, we had dinner with him and Michelle last night. You're really a lot more fun than I thought you would be. I think because of Michelle. And it would take all day to tell you how eminently qualified he is for this, but just trust me, he's way up at the top of the food chain when it comes to his topic today. So please make welcome Steve Boylan.
Thank you for that, and the bottle of scotch will be waiting in your room for that introduction. Like to thank Deb for inviting me out here. I've learned a ton today, and I hope that you enjoy this. Now, what I'd like to do before I start with the part that I had established is listening to the presentation, especially with Chris and the Telegraph. I quickly recalled that the media used the Telegraph to help get the news out across from coast to coast. And the media progressed with the railroad and with the Army and with the nation as they moved westward. Little known is, even today, news stories, especially the print, have not changed in the format on how they put together the news in the sense of for the print publications. There's a formula called an inverted pyramid. Most important information is at the top, and then the next piece. With the westward expansion, reporters followed, and they had to pay per letter to get their stories back to wherever, a lot of times New York, Chicago, etc. So you can just imagine how important the most important information had to be up front. And then as they whittled it down, if something got garbled in translation or they ran out of money, they could cut it. And then in the editing process, if needed, they could cut from the bottom because newsprint, and it was expensive, ink, setting the type, all those kinds of things took time. So if they needed to shorten the stories, they cut off from the bottom up so they wouldn't lose the most important part. So the media with the military and society and everything else transitioned west and used the Telegraph dramatically as well. So stories didn't take the Stagecoach or Pony Express or whatever means to get back. It was almost, by their standards, instantaneous. Not by our standards today, since we have 24-hour news and social media and everything else. So I'll go ahead and get started. We know the media was even around with George Washington. So, the typical questions: when is the war going to end? Is this a civil war? Do you have a timetable? Are the British winning? Kind of standard questions. And there probably wasn't an embedded reporter with Washington, but throughout the ages, the military has had to deal with the media. So there's a lot of misperceptions of what is news. So commonly, here are the categories of what constitutes news. The first, information, progress, and then you can read those. This is going to be a little bit of interaction if you want, and if you have a question as I go along, because this is a little bit of a topic perhaps off the beaten path of, let me know, please. I'd rather answer the question as we get to it, because it means probably somebody else has the same question. So, what up there usually gets covered? I heard sex. Yeah. Conflict. Pardon?
If it bleeds, it leads.
Okay, so that can be with consequences, conflict. What doesn't get covered mostly from your... The truth, well, good news. Yeah. Progress, some people call it good news. Virtue, okay. A lot of those topics don't get covered. You know, so-and-so rescues somebody, you know, that may get covered briefly, but it's quickly overtaken by other events. The 10,000 airplanes that landed today safely, it's what they're supposed to do. The one crash is going to take over all the news. Simply because it has consequences, there's emotion, there's prominence, there's suspense perhaps as far as why did it go down. There's some immediacy to it, and it's odd. We don't have planes crashing every day, thankfully, right? Otherwise, we'd probably have a lot less air travelers. So you can see what kind of, you know, you can think back to, you're all consumers of news, so what do you see and what resonates with you? The news organizations knows what people want to hear for the most part. And it's not always what some people call the good news stories. It doesn't sell papers, it doesn't sell airtime, it doesn't sell advertising. That's unfortunate, but that's the society we are in. I've got several news clips. Some of them you might have seen in the past. These are ones that I was typically involved in some form or fashion. So one of the things that, as a public affairs officer, that when I was on active duty that I looked for, I graded the media on 3 things. First one is accuracy. It really doesn't matter what the story's about as long as it's accurate. That's what we, from the military side, and I would say you as consumers of news, want from the reporters or the news organizations. Is the story accurate? So here's a short clip.
Meanwhile, advisors to General David Petraeus, the top U.S. commander in Iraq, are furious about a Washington Post story that appeared this morning. The article said Petraeus believed Iraqi leaders failed to take advantage of a reduction in violence to make adequate progress toward political reconciliation. But Colonel Steve Boylan, a Petraeus spokesman, insists Petraeus never used the word failed, and that was not his viewpoint. A full transcript of the Post's interview with Petraeus backs that up. Democrats were quick to pounce. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, responding to the article, said, quote, after almost 5 years of war and nearly 4,000 American lives lost, General Petraeus' admission proves that the president's Iraq policy has failed. President Bush and other Republicans can no longer claim that their status quo Iraq strategy is working.
Okay. So, what had occurred, the backstory to this, is we did an interview with the Washington Post foreign editor who came over from Washington, D.C. to Baghdad, and we set up about a 45-minute, ended up an hour-and-a-half interview with General Petraeus and the 2 Baghdad reporters, and thought it went well, and then come to find out the next day it didn't, because what they had written in their story at the lead, the very first part of the story above the fold, when you think of the newspaper folded, was that, as you know, you heard that he had thought that the Iraqi government had failed and that he never uttered those words. I recorded every interview he ever did while I was with him, or at least 99.9%. I immediately went to him and explained the problem. He goes, get it fixed. Okay, sir, Roger. I called the Baghdad Bureau. They said, nah, we think that's what he was trying to tell us. Okay, but he didn't say it. Well, but that was what we think he was trying to tell us. I go, but you can't put his name to something you think. Well, it's not quoted, it's a paraphrase. You know, we're really splitting hairs here now. And they go, we're not changing it. I went all the way up to the publisher in D.C. about it. He said, nope, supporting my reporters on the ground. I said, okay. Went back to the boss and said, the only way we're going to fix this is we have to release that portion of the transcript that they think you were trying to tell them something. He goes, okay, we'll clean it up. I went, no, sir. No, we're not going to clean it up. What do you mean? I said, he goes, there's a bunch of ums and ahs in there. I said, yes, sir. And we're gonna release it with just all those ums, ahs, pauses, et cetera. Why? Because they have the same recording we do, it can't be altered, it's gonna have to be a verbatim transcript in order to get our view across. Okay, go ahead, get it done. And immediately upon the release being put out with the transcript, Brett Baer, who at the time was the Pentagon correspondent for the Department of Defense, for Fox News, went out live with what you heard and what you see there. So the ramifications of us making sure that the media is accurate and the ramifications for the media to ensure they're accurate is you have the Speaker of the House, I'm trying to stay apolitical here, the Speaker of the House takes something she read and jumps to a conclusion that was an error in fact. So what are the ramifications of the media getting it wrong? They can be disastrous. Now, some people say, well, it was fake news. Well, that's a relatively new term. Reporters make mistakes. Sometimes they're, usually I would say, in my experience, are unintentional. Some reporters may have an agenda, and they're just looking for the quote or the words to fit the story that they want to go with. But as a public affairs officer, it was my responsibility to try to keep them honest in that regard, with information that we're providing. Yes, sir.
But in saying that, what you're saying is what they touched on earlier, that's what caused the Wounded Knee Massacre,
Yes.
that's what caused Sand Creek, and everything else because of miscommunication.
I would be generous to say that in this case, it was miscommunication. I could be generous and say it was their interpretation of what he was saying.
Right. Well, it'd be the same with like they just
Yeah.
misinterpreted what they were trying to say. Well, this is what we thought he was saying, he was threatening this, and he wasn't.
Yeah. I just hope that it wasn't intentional on their part, and I have no idea in this case. But, and they'll never admit whether it was or wasn't. Yes, sir.
And the question, in today's world, as politically as it is there a possibility that someone of importance like Petraeus or somebody now could ask, if you're going to do this interview, we're going to do it, we're going to tape it, it's going to be private, and my team has the ability, the last right to refuse to allow you to release it?
No. Not, I would say, well, let me back, it depends, okay? Depends on who you're working with. For example, with some foreign media outlets, you can get away with that. With US media, it's not gonna happen.
Then you don't give the interview, you don't tell them.
That can happen as well, but under the military side, we have a responsibility to inform the public.
But that's not informing him if you're allowing him to go out and paraphrase what was said.
So we're looking at potential then censorship. Because we're a government entity.
Another thing that I think is pretty strange today is if you I don't care what channel you watch, if you're watching a president or anybody, I think there ought to be some protocol in there. Everybody ought to have a paddle and hold it up when they want to have, when the president or whoever is stops talking. All these people sound like a bunch of cheerleaders standing in there. They all just yell questions. He's walking in, he's walking out, any of them. And I just think that doesn't show any respect on either part, the press or who they're interviewing.
Part of that is for show.
Well, is that the society we want to live in?
It's probably been, ever since I've been involved with it, that's pretty much the way it's been. I'm not saying it's the way it should be, but that's the way it's been. Know that there is usually one to three people the president already knows they're gonna pick for the first, second, third question. And within the White House, there are designated seats for which media. So the president, whichever president it is, can always go, okay, and a lot of times it's the most senior journalist that's in attendance, they'll go to that person first. Male, female, doesn't matter, you know, it's the most senior, reporter, journalist in that room usually gets the first question.
The reporters will claim freedom of the press to put what they want on there the way they see it and want the people to see it.
Yes. It is the only, it's one of the 5 entities, so to speak, that's protected in the Constitution. Freedom of religion, freedom to assemble, freedom for redress, freedom of the press, and freedom of speech. Those 5 areas are protected by the Constitution. So whether some of the media get it right or wrong, the last thing we want as a free society, this is, you know, me speaking, is for our press to be regulated. There is no school that the journalists have to go to ensure that they are a bona fide journalist. Their news organization, et cetera, says they're a journalist. There are many journalism schools. KU has a wonderful one. Missouri has a wonderful one. Columbia University, Northwestern. But you don't have to go and get a bachelor's of science or arts in journalism to be a journalist. All right. And we want the characterization to be correct. This was in 2005. Building Iraq's army mission improbable. So what happened, and again, unfortunately, it's the Washington Post. They seem to screw it up sometimes more than others. This was early in the efforts for the coalition, the multinational forces in Iraq, to try to stand up a new Iraqi army. Remember, invasion was 2003. Most major combat operations ended late 2003, beginning 2004, and we started trying to become an advisor role and stand up a bona fide Iraqi army, although they had one that was disbanded that our civilian leadership did. Decisions at the civilian leadership level over time has been seen that it didn't necessarily help the situation, but it is what it is. So we had a National Guard unit assigned to the worst Iraqi unit there was at the time, and it was a match made, unfortunately. The Washington Post reporter was embedded, meaning that he was living with them for about a week or so. He came away seeing that the efforts were not going well, so from one data point, he came up with this story saying that it wasn't going to work at all, or at least improbable. So the characterization of it is off. You would need several data points to try to come up with that type of conclusion. So they jumped the gun on this. And the context. This was while I was there as the director of the Combined Press Information Center. This is when the car bombs started being used against our forces. So up in Talifar, which in the northern part of the country, there was an evening patrol being done by U.S. forces. A van was quickly approaching the patrol. There was ability to try to warn them. They fired warning shots. They did everything they were supposed to. The van did not stop, so the last resort is the members of the convoy, the patrol at the back of the convoy fired into the van, stopping the vehicle and ultimately killing the mother and father. Unfortunately, there were kids in the back of the van. It was a family. They, for whatever reason, to this day, will never know why they didn't stop, why they didn't heed the signals being given. Kind of goes back to communications, 2 different cultures. You would think the warning shots would have done it, but it didn't. The bright spotlight into the vehicle didn't do it. Nothing did it. For us to try to explain, the U.S. military explain what happened, would have been difficult because it's never our fault, is what a lot of people think. Fortunately for us, in this respect for communication, there was a embedded photojournalist with them. His name was Chris Hondros. Unfortunately, he was killed in Libya during a bombing many years after this. He became the spokesperson for us inadvertently by describing the events as they took place because he was there. We had an independent observer to explain what happened. This story could have gone what today would be called viral in a matter of moments once it hit. Instead, it was a quick little report and it died off because he was able to give an accurate description of the context of what was happening at that time. My boss would say many times you can't play, you can't win if you don't play. So going back to your question, sir, we don't give the interview. Well, there are times we may not if we don't trust completely what's going to occur between the two parties, so to speak. But we have an obligation to inform the public on what's happening with their treasured resource, namely husbands, wives, kids, sons, family members, etc. So these are just some examples of who we dealt with periodically over time, plus hundreds more. But the key point is we, the military, can't stick our head in the sand because we don't like what's being reported. This was the congressional testimony that the Ambassador Crocker and General Petraeus were required to come back for. I took that picture as I was standing behind. I was getting ready to sit down. I said, oh, this is too cool. Took that picture, and the amount of clicks going off by all the cameras, you would have thought it was a machine gun. It was an incredible experience to watch my boss and Ambassador Crocker testify before Congress. But it was a feeding frenzy. And thing is, nobody in the public got really to see what it looked like. So that's why I put it up here, is here's kind of how the sausage is being made. And that's what the public saw. That was on the front page of the USA Today on the 12th of September.
Show them which one you are, Steve.
The one without the beard. I'm right here. He retired as a 2-star. He's retired now. I retired. He was our personal protection, a chief warrant officer. He's a major at the time. He was the aide to General Petraeus. He's now a colonel at West Point, permanent professor, and that was one of his speechwriters. And he was, of course, General Petraeus was responding to comments, questions from Congress. Sometimes, you can't lose if you don't play. During General Petraeus' first tour in Iraq in 2003 with the invasion, he had just had a huge meeting with a bunch of the tribal leaders, and they had brokered a deal to hold elections and to get things settled down up in Mosul, up in the northern part of Iraq. They were flying out of it. He had a reporter with him from the Washington Post again, and the reporter asked him a simple question. So how does that make you feel? And without thinking, in the sense of, that this was going to be the headline, he said, hey, this is great. I mean, he was ecstatic. They had gone great. The expectations of the bloodshed was going to come down. We were going to get the different tribes to work together. He said, it's like a mix of being president and the Pope. Well, the reporter right then had his headline. It was a good story, but you could imagine he took a little bit of heat for that kind of comment. I was not his PAO then or under this other one. he was getting ready to go back to Iraq as a 3-star to be put in charge of the training mission to try to get the Iraqi forces ready to take over fully. And there was a lot of hoopla, and he was asked, you know, to take a picture for Newsweek. Not my preference of how this would have gone. I would have probably told him, you know, they can follow you around, but we're not gonna stage a photo. But this one photo just about derailed a career for him. He took a lot of heat for this. And it was, unfortunately, sometimes, you know, his staff didn't set him up for success. But he survived. But again, when Time Magazine decided to put him as one of the Men of the Year, they came out and they wanted to stage a portrait, which is what this is considered, a portrait session. And we said, no, not happening. You can follow him around. If you get the picture you want, great. If you don't, then you can use his official photo, but you're not getting a staged photo. You know, we must play. It's not, you know, at the time when we put, not my army, it's America's army, right? So we have to report out to the American public on what's happening. There's a huge misperception that a lot of people think that my boss at the time loved doing all these interviews. Not so much. In fact, there was a point in time where he said he was done doing them, and I had to go in and convince him, as much as a colonel can convince a 4-star, to go back out and start doing these, because the interview requests just kept piling up. And after a few days, we came to an agreement, sort of, that he would go back out and start doing these. Because he did feel that it was an obligation of his, it was his responsibility to tell the public what their family members were doing and what and how he, as the commander, was spending that resource. Bad news doesn't get, you know, it's bad. You know, bad news doesn't get better with age. I don't know if many of you recall, back in 2003, just before the invasion, a U.S. soldier threw a grenade in a tent of his fellow soldiers. You know, we call it fragging. It happened a lot in Vietnam. Not so much since, but it happened periodically. And he had to get out quickly and start talking about it. You know, one of the implications is people don't want to, you know, they don't want to tell you bad news. And don't try to put lipstick on a pig. This is Easter Sunday, 2008. We called it, I'm sorry, no, it may have been Easter Sunday. We called this March Madness. The Iraqi forces had gone into Basra, and the result was, this is what is considered the international zone. This is the old presidential palace, which is now the acting U.S. embassy, and all these plumes and how smoky it is from rocket attacks that we were receiving. And that's all because the Prime Minister of Iraq had decided to go clean out Basra. So, climbed up to a taller building, and I took this picture because it was interesting to me, at least at the time. But we were getting phone calls from the media who were living right across the river, right over there, asking, you know, they can see the smoke plumes coming up and they can hear the rockets going over their heads and landing in the international zone. They're asking, so how's it going over there? Well, you hear the same things and, you know, that I'm hearing. You can see the smoke. It's, you know, it is what it is, right? Air raid sirens, or what we called the big voice at the time, was going off all the time for incoming rounds. We gotta keep expectations realistic for the public. So let me play this clip for you. Come on.
Lived. I think by tomorrow we'll see the Santa Ana winds relax and we'll see improved weather conditions out there.
Okay, well, that's good. Thanks, Bonnie.
That is good news. Making progress, little victories for American troops on the front lines in Iraq, led by General David Petraeus. Our Harris Whitbeck is in Baghdad, and he had a chance to spend some time with the U.S. commander in Iraq, and Harris tells us about his visit now. Tell us about that, Harris.
Well, Don, we actually spent all day with him. We left Baghdad around 6:30 this morning, went to visit 3 different military installations in Iraq. Some of them are the furthest out there. They're as close to the margins of the multinational forces area of influence in Iraq as you can get. One outpost just 15 miles from the border with Syria. General Petraeus met with 200 soldiers from the U.S. Army that have been out there manning that post, mostly doing work involving the community. The community there is a smuggler's town. They say they are working on trying to stop some of the smuggling of weapons and foreign fighters that might be occurring on the Syrian border there. The general met with the soldiers. He had a Christmas breakfast with them this morning. He then praised them for their effort. He said that he, in his mind, the effort in Iraq is going pretty well. It's going much better than this time a year ago. He also re-enlisted several soldiers whose re-enlistment was up. He participated in that ceremony, swearing them in for another tour of duty, for another period of service in the U.S. Armed Forces. He then visited 2 other military outposts in Iraq, another one also close to the Syrian border. The last one northeast of Baghdad in Diyala province, an area that, in the general's own words, is still an area of activity for al-Qaeda. He told troops there that they were writing the book on how to wage a counterinsurgency effort. He said that while progress has been made, there still is a long and hard road up ahead. Don?
Hey, Harris, I've got a question for you. The Turkish military is saying that it killed more than 150 Kurdish militants in northern Iraq this month. What did the general have to say about those battles?
Well, you're right. The Turkish government did say that nearly 200 members of the PKK, insurgents from PKK, have been killed in military incursions. Those incursions by Turkish warplanes have ruffled a few feathers within the Iraqi government. There have been some public statements to that effect. General Petraeus, however, said that he felt that everybody, all parties involved, are in agreement as to what the traits of PKK really are.
The Turks certainly have a right to protect themselves from these terrorists. Now, having said that, there also has to be a sensitivity, obviously, to any incursion that would go beyond certainly those areas where there are just the PKK. And the PKK areas, by and large, are literally just PKK fighters.
The U.S. government set up an information exchange center in Ankara, the Turkish capital, just a few days ago to better to improve the flow of information between Ankara, Baghdad, and Washington, and also authorities in the Kurdish area of Iraq, so that there could be basically just a better coordination of what's going on up there. But again, Petraeus is saying that everybody is in agreement that the PKK are in fact a terrorist organization.
Harris Whitbeck in Baghdad on this Christmas for us. Thank you very much, Harris.
Sounds of the season, New Orleans style.
The reason I put that one up is to give you an idea that we weren't looking through rose-colored glasses. Nothing in there was saying it's great, everything's wonderful, we're working, we're going to be out of here by Christmas. A famous saying that MacArthur had out of Korea, which we know didn't work. All those kinds of things. We have to keep expectations realistic. It's almost sometimes under promise and over deliver. Because in this type of situation, truly the enemy gets to vote on how it's going to turn out. We like to think we control more than we can, but we can't. I've got a next report that comes out, and I'd like you to, when you watch it, I'd like you to wonder, think about who set this up. Try it that way. Cannot play the media. Okay, we can try one thing real quick, and I can go right to the clip itself. I apologize, it all worked when I tried it.
Goes back to shooting the computer.
The troop surge in Iraq created a lot of controversy, with many people divided over whether it would work. Well, we have a follow-up now on that very question with ABC's Terry McCarthy in our Nightline Playback segment.
It's the question so many people are asking. Is the surge succeeding? It depends on whom you ask.
Pardon the technical difficulties.
The troop surge in Iraq created a lot of controversy, with many people divided over whether it would work. Well, we have a follow-up now on that very question with ABC's Terry McCarthy in our Nightline Playback segment.
It's the question so many people are asking. Is the surge succeeding? It depends on whom you ask. Senator John McCain thinks it is. He flew into Baghdad over the weekend, spent an hour in a market in the city center surrounded by heavy U.S. security, and then rushed to a press conference to announce things are getting better.
Never have I been able to drive from the airport. Never have I been able to go out into the city as I was today.
For the senator from Arizona, there is a lot riding on the new Baghdad security plan. His presidential ambitions are more closely tied to the success of the U.S. surge than any other candidate. For the citizens of Baghdad, the stakes are even higher. For many, it is a matter of life or death. To see for ourselves how the surge is working, we spent the last week visiting neighborhoods in Baghdad where the locals told us they thought life had got better since the surge began in mid-February. We weren't able to stay longer than an hour at any location because for an American TV crew, nowhere is without risk in Baghdad. We found the safest areas clustering around the center of the city, near the heavily guarded Green Zone.
This is Haifa Street, otherwise known as Sniper Street. Until 2 months ago, a major battleground between U.S. troops and insurgents. Today, people who live on Haifa Street tell us it's quiet, or at least quiet enough for them to venture back out onto the street.
I could barely believe I was standing there. It used to be too dangerous even to drive down that street. And yet people we know who live on Haifa Street assured us it was safer now. These men even stopped to have tea in direct line of sight of high-rises where snipers used to lurk. Film us, they said, to show how life is coming back to normal. 3 miles across town in Karada, one of Baghdad's main shopping areas, Hussein Jihad, a dress shop owner, told us business is much better as many more people are coming out shopping. He says that security has improved there because there are more U.S. and Iraqi army patrols and because of increased checkpoints. On the road I take home, says Hussein, there are 10, sometimes 15 checkpoints. So I get home safe. He says the people he sees in his store want their old lives back. People have to go out, he says, or they get trapped in depression if they stay inside their homes. For Mohammed Hassan, the surge couldn't have come at a better time. His family has been making ice cream for 12 years. Now their shop in Babel, next door to Karada, is doing well because of improved security just in time for summer. That is when his business is best. There are few areas that people can go to in Baghdad, says Mohammed. In most neighborhoods, the stores are all closed. Just to the east, we visited the Al-Khazara Mosque in Zayuna, which was firebombed by militants last year. Mosques have been a particular target for sectarian attacks. Many have closed down in the past year. But after 2 new checkpoints went up nearby last month, people slowly began returning to prayer, navigating barbed wire to get inside. Some people have started coming back to the mosque, says this man, but others are still afraid. We found screams, but no real fear in Baghdad's biggest amusement park, just north of the Green Zone. We're in Zawra Amusement Park, right in the center of Baghdad. Until about 6 weeks ago, this place was pretty much empty. But now, as a slow sense of security is starting to creep back, at least into the center of the city, people feel safe bringing their kids here on a Friday afternoon. For us, it's really great to see people enjoying themselves in a city that otherwise sees violence as part of its daily diet. We come here to forget about all that is going on in Iraq, says 16-year-old Shahad. Here it feels like the good old days. Of course, it is an illusion. The good old days, when the streets were safe, are still a long way from returning. If Iraq's politicians cannot sit down and negotiate a peace settlement, the war will quickly sweep away the semblance of security in this small sector of Baghdad. Even Senator McCain had to concede political progress was slow in coming.
Is it still a question mark as to whether the Iraqi government will do everything that's necessary? I can't guarantee that.
In central Baghdad, people know there is no guarantee the relative calm will last. For the moment, people are happy to enjoy whatever release from violence they can find. I'm Terry McCarthy for Nightline in Baghdad.
So how do you think that came about, that story?
Somebody set it up. Somebody arranged and suggested to the reporters.
Anyone else? Not saying you're right or wrong.
Did not hear her answer.
Pardon?
Did not hear her answer.
Oh, she said somebody set it up, and I'm assuming you mean somebody from us, maybe.
Well, I'm just maybe made a suggestion, of where to go, so I don't know.
The senator wants, he gets.
That was clipped in after his visit. He visited in April as part of a congressional delegation. Over our 20 months in Iraq, when I was with General Petraeus, we had 99 congressional delegations come visit us. And my office was responsible for coordinating and setting those up. I didn't want any more. Fortunately, one of my officers was a Navy Reserve officer who was the deputy chief of staff for Mrs. Bush at the time. She was recalled to active duty, so she knew all these people, which made my job a heck of a lot easier.
My question would be who benefits most from the clip? So who benefits most from getting that message?
I think the people back home. We had nothing to do, we the military, my office, nobody had anything to do with that clip. That was all on Terry McCarthy. He pitched that to ABC and had to fight a little bit to get it done because of the perceived danger that was still there. I mean, this is April. We started the surge in February late January, February of '07, then the surge is really the surge of forces, the additional brigades going over to Iraq, 5 additional brigades to try to get a stop on things. But Terry McCarthy did all this on his own. And we found out about it when we watched it. And I was like, oh boy. And made sure the boss saw it. It was annotated in our daily updates. And it was amazing for us to see, because typically what we're used to seeing was if it bleeds, it leads, or the bomb of the day. We knew, and we tried to push many times, that there was a lot more going on in Iraq, even at the start of the surge, than what was being reported. And Terry, for that 4 or 5 minute clip that aired on national media, at least ABC at the time, was able to give everyone a little bit of sense that it's not just daily explosions. I don't know, do you want to see another clip?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. This one was May, just a month later, kind of an update a little bit.
Our closer look tonight, the mission in Iraq and the commander President Bush has entrusted to save it, General David Petraeus. In fact, at his news conference last week, the president mentioned the Petraeus name 12 times. The West Point graduate has been called Iraq's repairman. For a time, he was in charge of training Iraqi troops, and since February, he has been leading all U.S. troops there. He crafted the troop buildup, the so-called surge, and he is well aware of a looming deadline to show progress. Our Terry McCarthy spent time with the general in Anbar province and sat down with him for an overview of where things stand.
He is the architect of the troop surge. He knows better than anyone the cost in American lives.
You some days hate to look at the computers where you get this information and you get the updates during the course of a day. There's nothing that weighs more heavily on a commander than the news of casualties.
Baghdad is particularly deadly.
To the right. There you go, there you go, there you go.
And if you're going to secure Baghdad, you have to get into the belts that surround Baghdad. That's where the car bomb factories are. And frankly, there is tough fighting out there. The enemy does not want to give up those areas, which in some cases were sanctuaries.
The pressure on Petraeus is enormous, and he routinely works 16-hour days.
Everything is tribal here.
In a briefing with top commanders in Anbar province, Petraeus spoke of his concern about suicide bombers coming across the Syrian border to Baghdad.
60, 80, or a bit more foreign fighters transit through Syria in a given month. And you can do the math. That's a substantial number of sensational attacks.
Everywhere we followed him on the airbase out in the desert in Anbar, Petraeus radiated urgency. No wonder. In September, he has to report to Congress on the progress of the surge. He calls that date a big rock in the rucksack.
Are you happy with the rate of progress on the Iraqi political front?
Look, I was impatient when it started in 2003, and I'm still impatient. I think everyone is impatient, including the Iraqi leaders. And what we have to see now is, in fact, whether they can make the most of this opportunity that our soldiers and their soldiers are fighting and dying to give to them.
General Petraeus is using the full strength of the American military in this war, Charlie, but he also knows time is running out.
Terry McCarthy tonight in Baghdad, and that's our closer look for tonight. Up next, our closer look for tonight. Up next, one of America's...
Okay. The reason I use that clip is it's very contextual. It shows both sides. You heard General Petraeus talk about, there was no rosy glasses, there was no great expectations of what was going to happen. He was being as transparent as possible within the classification guidance and everything else that the military has to deal with. He was talking with Terry, but his real audience was the American people. And he was trying to explain to them a little bit about what was going on. Terry had, I would say, showed how good a reporter he was by not just taking one side in the time that we had started, that we had got back to Iraq in February in 07 when we landed. And so he was one of the many that I would go to. Whenever General Petraeus went out, I was given anywhere from 1 to 3 seats on the helicopters or other aircraft to bring media with us. So, and they got to see, sometimes more depending on where we were going in vehicles, they got to see everything that he did. They got to hear everything he did except for one meeting, and that was with his junior officers, that was just where he met with the lieutenants and captains and just had a discussion with them. Not even the aide got to go into that one. So he was trying to just get to the public on what's happening. Just as September, October timeframe, 08 was rolling around, we were getting ready to enter or end the 20 months we were there. Brett Baer had requested a final interview, and after some discussions, we said, okay, if you're going to be here, we'll do it with you. So this was the final report from Baghdad. Come on, please.
Chief White House correspondent Brett Baer is also in Iraq. He is traveling with General David Petraeus as the commander of U.S. forces in the country takes a final look around before heading home.
Eunice, of course. Where's the soccer ball? To watch General David Petraeus work the crowds in Baghdad's Georgia market,
Assalamu alaikum.
you might think he was running for elective office here.
Habibi. Shukran jazilan. Iraq will always be in my heart.
But he's actually on his final tour of the country before handing over command in Iraq next week and taking on a new job as the head of Central Command.
Do you have mixed feelings as you get ready to leave this place? Of course, sure, absolutely. There's a lot left to be done. You'd like to complete everything, but that's not possible. It's been very, very hard. There's been nothing easy about this. You'll recall that in the beginning we said it was hard but not hopeless, and I think now it's still hard, but it's hopeful.
As we walked with minimal security, no helicopters overhead, no flak jackets, and no helmets, Petraeus said a lot has changed since the start of the surge.
The first month I returned, there were 42 car bombs in Baghdad in a single month, and they were devastating. They were truly horrific.
2 of the deadliest car bombs detonated in this market, February 12, 2007, killing 175 people and injuring 150 more.
The new building was blown up, yeah. The newish looking building was the one that was blown up. Really terrible.
Petraeus says Al-Qaeda in Iraq, the group responsible for the biggest bombings, has been significantly degraded. But the general still calls Iraq the central front in the war on terror.
We think right now they're still clinging to the idea that they could revive Al-Qaeda in Iraq.
But the U.S. military in Baghdad has released details of intercepted communications that commanders said were made between Al-Qaeda number 2 man, Ayman al-Zawahiri, and the leadership of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, in which the Iraq group is said to complain of being unable to raise money, get recruits, or receive support from the locals. No support for Al-Qaeda is something Petraeus says he hears in conversations every day and numerous times in the Georgia market.
Give us freedom, and we will give you our friendship. Congratulations.
Shukran jazilan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Peace with you.
Thank you. But, I mean, you've heard that here. It's been spontaneous. It's people that obviously I don't know. We don't know. Assalamu alaikum.
But is he worried that the progress here could somehow be affected by a wrong step in Washington? If someone came in and said, this isn't working, how would you respond to that?
Well, that's a question for should that ever happen. And in truth, I honestly doubt that would happen.
General Petraeus believes results on the ground here will trump any talk in Washington or on the campaign trail. At the end of our tour of the market, we ran into an Iraqi traffic cop who said he wrote 3 tickets today, 1 for an expired tag and 2 for drivers not wearing seatbelts. That is exactly what Petraeus wants to see. In Baghdad with the commanding general, Brett Baer, Fox News.
Yeah, writing traffic tickets in still what was considered a combat zone. But that's the kind of thing that we were looking for. What didn't get covered many times was the stories about the local city councils, the tribal affairs going on. People tend to forget that Iraq is made up of multiple tribes. Nationalism isn't one of those things that they tend to, we think more of nationalism than the typical Iraqi does initially. First, it's family, tribe, sect, and then maybe nation. The only time I saw a complete cessation of hostilities was when the Iraqis entered the soccer cup and had continued to win at certain times. And then you had to worry about celebratory fire because what goes up is coming down. And even as we were getting ready to leave, and the clip they showed you that they inserted of the bombing, that was 2 days after he took command, and we went out to that market and that neighborhood, and it was devastating. So there had been a lot of progress up to this point, but still not complete. So in the end, for military media relationships, it's never a job complete. It's always a work in progress. And as you are consumers of news, I know people tend to watch, read, listen to what they tend to agree with, perhaps. But I would suggest that you need to take a wide swath of news to kind of get a better, more whole picture of what's going on. Because somewhere in the middle there is probably more ground truth than watching one network, reading only one newspaper, and definitely don't get your news from Facebook or Twitter or whatever else that might be. But do anybody have any other questions?
I want to, before you take some other questions, I want something I want you to respond to. One of the reasons that I really wanted Steve to come, and when I would visit the classrooms at Fort Leavenworth, especially during these times where people were returning from theater, and they're on edge and they hate the media. I mean, just generally they hated the media. And I wasn't used to that. Everybody likes me, so these people that, you're part of the media, and they just instantly were hostile. And one of the discussions I remember that we got into, and it's flown out of my head, but when was it a Marine that was killed and his body dragged through the streets? And
You talking Black Hawk Down or?
In
in Somalia or in Iraq?
In Iraq. And that would have been,
I'm trying to remember what year that would have been.
I can't remember what year either, but it was reported and there were pictures of it that were shared. And of course, that it was a very emotional subject. Fort Wallace, where we are right now, 155 years ago, was a battleground. And we just happened to have a photographer here the day we have this battle. That's a fluke. But embedded reporters were not. There were embedded reporters, or the equivalent, as you know, covering the Indian Wars. Theodore Davis doing the sketches and writing articles. Henry Morton Stanley that found Dr. Livingston. He was one of those reporters that was on the ground covering the Indian Wars and befriended Satanta. So he's talking to the enemy, essentially. They're covering the peace treaties, but they're going sometimes into camps. They're coming into camps with the soldiers. So the battle that occurred here, in which Sergeant Williams, this is from Harper's Weekly, I think in July 1867, after the battle here in June, body went viral. And what is that going to do? Of course, it inflamed the feelings about removing the Indians, putting them on the reservations. And so that discussion about how far do you go with the reporting is just as relevant in 1867 as it is right now. And my answer, while I did not, nobody wants to see that kind of disrespect to anybody portrayed, but Steve's point was exactly right. The American public deserves to know as accurately as they can where they are sending their sons and daughters and husbands and wives. They need to understand that situation as much as is possible. So Steve, talk about that and the challenges of that and the balance in there and sharing that information.
Well, nobody likes to see that kind of image or story come out. When I would talk with reporters about coverage and other soldiers or other leaders, I would use an example. If two Blackhawks collided somewhere and all were killed, that's a tragic event. We don't want to see that reported. We don't want to see the images. But as long as the reporters or the media cover it accurately, with proper context, with the proper characterization, then it is what it is. It's news. And it deserves just as much coverage as anything else we do, or sometimes don't do. I was a captain in the 24th Infantry Division during Somalia, and when Black Hawk Down occurred, I was the officer in charge of a task force we had a rotating every 90 days. We had an aviation, I was an Apache pilot at the time, an aviation task force for the 18th Airborne Corps out of Fort Bragg to go anywhere in the world that they needed. We were alerted. We got a phone call, woke both my wife and I up at 3 or 4 in the morning, and said, my battalion commander came on and said, go to division at 7 a.m. You have a briefing for deployment. I said, what's going on? He goes, turn the TV on. Turned it on, and there were pictures of the Army aviation crew being drugged through the streets of Somalia. And I'm like, okay. I started the alert process for my unit. And then we were on alert for 110 days after that to go. We were on again, off again. And that kind of image, we had a sister unit over in Iraq at the time flying, and they were unarmed. They were observation aircraft. And we had to have discussions within the unit on this was not going out for revenge, because we were pissed off. And there were many of us that felt we were ready to lay waste to Mogadishu. And the aircraft I was supposed to take would have done that very easily with 7 Apaches fully loaded and a month's worth of ammunition going with us initially. We could have taken care of business, so to speak. We had to step back and take precautions to make sure the emotional component of this didn't get in the way of what we were probably going to go do. The public was inflamed, rightfully so. But I would also argue that the media, in the reporting they did, got us into Somalia, and the reporting got us out, because public opinion does matter. In fact, I wrote an article about public opinion being a center of gravity. A lot of people want to blame the media for what's covered. Well, it's a decision. There's a process. It's a pack mentality. If one's covering it, they're all going to cover it so they don't miss out. So you can almost gauge where it is. And yes, certain organizations lean certain ways and things like that. But I go back to as long as it's accurate in context with the proper characterization, it's fair game. Whatever's happening is fair game. Yeah.
Sir, question. Rolling Stone magazine interview with General Stanley, I can't say his last name.
McChrystal.
McChrystal, yeah, I served with his brother. Career wiped out, all of that over. Could you talk for a minute about the press coverage of that and who we needed to kill? I mean.
Okay, I'm gonna probably get in some touchy ground here. And this is my opinion, okay? I knew, because the reporter's dead now, died in a tragic car crash. I knew the reporter very well from Iraq, Michael Hastings. He reported for Newsweek, and then his fiance had been killed in Iraq. She was another reporter. He was a good reporter. I knew the media relations officer, civilian, that was advising General McChrystal and team on doing that story. Not one I would have done. Just for the simple fact is the audience for Rolling Stone is not necessarily the audience we're trying to get to. Doesn't mean you ignore them, but it just means I may not put as much effort into that audience as others. I've done one media event with Rolling Stones way early in my career, and it turned out great. It was with Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado Springs. I've worked with 60 Minutes. It can come out fine. But the fault for that article lay at those that were being interviewed, in my opinion. They should have known better than to speak on the record in the way they were speaking. When the article came out, I figured General McChrystal probably had a 50-50 shot. I got an advance copy, and I read it, and I figured he had a 50-50 shot. NATO loved what he was doing because it was also a NATO mission. He had the support of NATO, so I figured that might be the sway. But at the same time, General McChrystal did not get removed from his position for anything General McChrystal said. He was removed or asked to step down because of what his officers said. He was more or less the climate within the organization that he allowed to occur is what most likely. I wasn't there in the president's office when the discussion was going on, but from what I understand, that's probably what was what happened. You know, it's one of those things when we train others what we call Media 101 or how to do an interview. There's such things as on the record, which everything you say can be used with your name. There's on background, which what you can say can be used, but without your name. And then there's off the record, which cannot be used in any form or fashion. I always recommend to people, unless you know and trust the reporter, don't go off the record. You have to establish a relationship with them to know they're going to honor that verbal contract, so to speak.
Who was president then?
Obama, President Obama.
We're gonna have to stop there because we've got so much to do tonight. We're gonna have to break down. Steve, thank you so much, and you're gonna be with us tonight, so
Yep.
we can bug you with more questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Steve, we appreciate your presentation, and I hesitate to call you Steve after Dad's introduction. I should call you Colonel.
No, Steve is fine, please.
But, in your relaying of your experience as a public affairs officer, you could be talking about 1876 or currently. The challenges are there. And I think in doing research, you've given us a guide to determine whether the information we're receiving in historical research or whatever is accurate, and even in listening to today's news. So, in keeping with Dennis's inspiration for this award, he says that the presentation needs to be inspiring, which yours was, informing, and preserving. So you've given us tools for preservation. So we thank you very much. It's a privilege for me to represent DK and according to you with this coin for your, it's the 12th DK Clark Series speaker.
Well, thank you very much.
Once we've dismissed with our programming here, I would like I think there's 7 DK Clark awardees that are here this evening, and I would like to get a quick photo up here at the front with the podium. So if you could meet us up here right afterward, that would be wonderful. At this point, we are needing to push ahead, and we will have a lot, but I would like to recognize Chance and Michelle Marble, who are going to have a special presentation also for this evening. So go ahead.
So tonight we're going to be giving away this quilt here, and it's a quilt of honor. So if you are a veteran, active duty military, or have served, we will be in the artifact room in the corner, and you can get the Wiser room. You can get 1 ticket per person. If you have served, it's free of entry. It's just a thank you for your service. And then at dinner, we will draw the winning ticket for that. The only thing I do ask is if you guys could be present to win, that would be best, because that way I can find you and give it to you. So.
Okay, thank you. That's wonderful. I would like to quickly say our upcoming events are our Fort Wallace annual meeting is coming up on May 1st. The rodeo is over Memorial Day weekend, Saturday at 7 and Sunday at 5 o'clock. And so be sure and join us for that. And then September 9th and 10th will be our exposition, our education day. More about, we've got some really fun stuff planned for September for our exposition and our education for our young people, for our students. Last year, we educated 1,200 students here on our grounds, and that's kind of where it's at. We've just got it in our belly now that's a lot of what we need to be doing. And also I'd like to recognize our staff. Please thank our staff, Nancy, Patty Lou, our young intern, Adrian Seltzer, and Ramona, who at the age of 91 still runs circles around us. And then tonight's caterers are Smoky Hill Barbecue. Again, I'd like to thank the Dane G. Hansen Foundation and the Melvin Bishop Speaker Memorial for all they do to help make our programming possible. Okay, I think, and then, all right, let me give you a quick rundown. We are going to break down this area. So I would like anybody who could to please help us to set up. After the picture, Deb, can you take charge of decoration too? Getting the decorations out and getting those put in place. We will need these chairs, a lot